Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet again another live stream. Today, we're doing a Pac-12 roundtable, as I like to call it. Spencer is back with me again as we are live here on YouTube, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch again. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of teams that, unless you're in the Pacific Northwest, most people probably don't necessarily care about.
Or Madison, Wisconsin.
And
which we'll get to, but I'm not being entirely facetious there, but yeah, we'll get to that.
I get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, today we're going to talk about the bottom pits of the Pac-12. Two of them, anyway, or one of them.
I was going to say that better be one, not two. I'm not going to stand here and let you say that it'd be two. One.
Well, because I meant to put both of them. So basically, we're going to talk about Stanford and Washington State today. I was going to have us do Stanford and Cal together for obvious reasons, but
you'll be interested to hear my take on Cal, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that tomorrow. So who we starting with, Stanford or Washington State?
Let's start with Stanford.
Okay, we'll start with Stanford.
So I know, this is year one under a new head coach for Stanford. What's the outlook as far as the trust that the program and the university has for the head coach? I know that it's, he's being pulled up from FCS because he was head coach at Portland State.
Sacramento State, yeah.
Sacramento State.
Same conference, though. Same conference. So Troy Taylor's entering year one, and the important thing with him this year is he cannot, in any way, shape, or form, he could go 0-12 this year. He should not be judged. They won't go 0-12. They might go 1-11. 2-10 would frankly be okay, because that would mean they beat either Notre Dame or that would mean they beat. Oh no, they could go 2-10 and not beat a Power 5 school. If they were to repeat their record from last year, 3-9, they would go over their win total. So Vegas actually just adjusted this line last week. Their win total for a long time was 3.5. It has been bumped down to 2.5. And I think that that's twofold. Number one, the team that picked up an extra win in the preseason odds according to FanDuel is Cal, who I am unusually high on. Not conference contending high, but high. That's for tomorrow. But the second thing is Stanford's quarterback situation, no bueno. So they lose Tanner McKee, who goes to the NFL. I don't fully understand. He's big. He's got a good arm, but he wasn't great at Stanford. He was okay, but he's not mobile. He is a statue in the pocket. Kirk Cousins is Lamar Jackson compared to when you look at a guy like Tanner McKee. But that's a different conversation. So they don't know who their quarterback's going to be. They have Ari Patu, they have Ashton Daniels, and then they brought in a dual threat transfer from Syracuse. They did that kind of later in spring ball because I think they were looking at Daniels and Patu and saying, I don't know if we have a starter here. So it could be a revolving door of quarterbacks. And frankly, I don't know that that's a bad thing necessarily. And Troy Taylor also employed a two-quarterback system when he was at Sacramento State, and he was very successful there. They made an FCS playoff run a season ago. And they play Sacramento State in week 3. Their schedule starts Hawaii, USC, and then Sac State, which would be super fun. And if you're talking about FCS upset alert, I'm just saying, Sacramento State was a very good FCS team last year. I don't know who they've had come and go, but I do know that Stanford is not going to be a good Power 5 team this year. So you never know. But I suspect they'll be able to find a way to get that done and such. But the thing with Stanford and why they can't be judged is the quarterback situation and the roster situation. Stanford cannot take transfers at the same rate. It's not that they take 0, but they can't take them at the same rate that everybody else is. And they've taken, I think, 5 or 6 transfers this offseason. A handful of them are from Ivy League schools. Like 2 or 3 of the 5 or 6, I'd have to double check the numbers, which I can't, but they're coming from Ivy League schools. So it's not your traditional Power 5 transfer. It doesn't mean they can't be solid players, but they're at a talent deficiency. Now, that does not mean that Troy Taylor, when Stanford goes 1-11 or 2-10 this year, that they should be judged harshly, or that he should be judged harshly, because he is recruiting exceptionally well and he is taking over a tough situation. So I think expectations for Stanford, my expectation is that they're going to be the worst team in the Pac-12. They were close to that a year ago, if not for Colorado. And I think Colorado had a much better offseason by any metric they did from a roster standpoint than Stanford. The Cardinal also lost a lot of talent from last year's team, but they can't bring in a massive influx the way other schools can. So you can build this roster into, at the very least, a good Pac-12 roster, maybe even a Pac-12 championship caliber roster. But you can't do it in 1 year, and you can't have a lot of transfer defections. It has to be done old school. You have to do it with recruiting class after recruiting class. But did you know that Stanford currently has a top 20 recruiting class in 2024? So it's not impossible. So I think expectations are pretty low. It's hard to see who they're going to beat in conference play. And I just think that this is something that is going to be expected for Stanford this year, and that Troy Taylor should be given a lot of leeway on that front.
Do you think that because of, oh my God, what's his name? David Shaw, do you think because of David Shaw leaving that there's going to be an impact one way or the other on the program? As far as
I think you could see a philosophy change. I think that's what you could see is David Shaw. And look, he it's easy to get caught up on recency bias and think, oh yeah, David Shaw stunk. Wrong, incorrect, not true. Yes, he rode the Harbaugh wave for a little while, but he rode it, or he had Stanford in a good place for a lot longer than quote unquote riding the momentum that a previous coach established. Like he solidified himself as a really good football coach. He won the Pac-12 several times. Stanford, this is a fun fact, has actually won the Pac-12 more than any other program in the conference. They have won it 4 times, and nobody else has won it more than 3. So I think, Oregon's technically won it 4.
Of course.
But one of those was the COVID year. So, like, what are we even talking about, right? So Stanford has won this conference many a times, and David Shaw kept them good for a long, long time. And I think Shaw just got caught up in an identity crisis with, do we need to go spread? Do we stay power? Do we continue looking like Iowa? Or do we try to look like Michigan? Or do we look like they went with this slow mesh and I didn't like that and it didn't work and I'm not a fan. So I think that was just, it was time for him to move on. Stanford and David Shaw realized that, and in classic David Shaw fashion, who is a 12 out of 10 as a human being, he just stepped aside. There was nothing messy. There was nothing chaotic. It was just, nope, this isn't working anymore. It's time to step away. So I think that Troy Taylor's got a tall task in front of him, but I don't think, there are some people who would say it's an impossible one now. I don't think it's an impossible one. I think it is a difficult one. But I think in terms of what they're going to look like, yeah, we might not ever see a Stanford team that looks the way the old Stanford teams did, which was line up, run power football, and have a great running back or a great quarterback at the center of it, be it Andrew Luck or Christian McCaffrey.
I remember when Shaw left, there were rumors about like the NIL being the reason he was leaving, because he felt like Stanford was at a disadvantage with the NIL. Do you feel like that's something that was true and is the case for them?
So my understanding of the situation is that they have not been as willing to participate in the NIL space as other people, and that is a disadvantage in talent acquisition in addition to the portal. However, the brand power of Stanford has always been that of the Harvard of the West.
Oh, yeah.
And you are still going to have college athletes, and it's easy to forget, and there's all this talk about should they be employees, which is a terrible idea, but that's a different conversation. But the brand of Stanford is still one that stands out among the rest. If you're a high school recruit, so their top rated commit in 2024 is Elijah Brown. Elijah Brown is the next highly rated 4-star modern day high school quarterback. Modern day's quarterback should not be committing to a 3-9 Stanford team, which is why I'm optimistic about the roster Troy Taylor can build, take time though it will. But I look at that sort of situation and say, okay, maybe behind the scenes they are getting into NIL, but what I think is more likely is if you have 5 offers, one of them is from Oregon, one of them is from, let's say, Boise State, one of them is from Arizona, and one of them is from Texas Tech, and one of them is from Stanford. All of those other schools, and I know Oregon stands out a little bit there, but all of those other schools, you're committing to the football program. You would not look at any of those schools in particular and say, I want to go to school there. But Stanford is a place where you say, I want to go to school there. And that is something that, look, it's not life-saving necessarily, but I think it can still be worth something on the recruiting front. Because if it wasn't, either they're changing their approach or what I'm saying is correct, because Stanford is currently on track to have a top 20 recruiting class. Now they have to keep it there, but at the very least, they're going to be top 30. They've recruited top 20 classes before. So it's not like it's impossible for all that to happen. And I feel like with where college football is at, that's the best kind of card they can play. And is that enough? We'll see. Time will tell. People automatically want to write them off, but I don't want to do that.
That makes sense. Where do you think is the strongest position for Stanford? And what do you think gives them the most benefit to have success this year?
I don't know that they've got a path to success. When you look at the defensive numbers from a year ago and the offenses that are in the PAC, I don't see you can't change that in 1 year. And by the way, I forgot to look up earlier, but just did. They brought in 4 transfers this offseason. So Justin Lamson is the dual threat quarterback from Syracuse. We'll see if he ends up being the starter. They brought in a couple of offensive tackles from Penn and Harvard, Ivy League schools, and they brought in Gathan Bernadelle, linebacker from FIU. That's it for their portal class. They lost starters on the perimeter, on the offensive line, at the linebacker position. And they were already not great in those areas. I think their offensive line was actually okay last year. They were just running a flawed philosophy of football, in my view. But they are just talent deficient compared to the other Pac-12 teams. And when you lose defensive starters and you don't replace them at a high level, and you are in a conference that is flooded with high-octane offenses and elite quarterbacks, you're going to struggle. And that's why their win total is the lowest in the Pac-12 and why they are my pick to finish last this year. Someone's got to finish last, but once upon a time, Oregon State finished last, and they are now a conference contender this season. So it's not as if that is destined to last forever.
Right. What do you feel like the philosophy is for Stanford with the new coaching system?
That's kind of the thing. We don't know because they ran a 2-quarterback system at Sacramento State. They ran it very effectively. I think that can work at the FCS level because it clearly did, and there are several teams at that level that do that. You can't do that in Power 5 football. You can't have a running quarterback and a throwing quarterback.
We're long past the time that it works. I mean, Urban Meyer made it work at Florida, slightly made it work at Ohio State, but it just doesn't work in today's style.
But even at Ohio State, are you referring to like the teams that had 3 quarterbacks, the JT Barrett, Braxton Miller, Cardale Jones team? Yeah. Braxton Miller got moved to wide receiver. Like you have to have one
Well,
quarterback.
'cause exactly, and it's like, if you look at the two times he had it, 2015 at Ohio State, the Tebow leak era at Florida, it seemed like it worked better at Florida than it did at Ohio State. And at Ohio State, it just seemed like, I don't know which one I want to pick.
Yeah, and I just don't feel that in today's world. I think players are faster, teams are deeper, they have more talent, and coaches are smarter than they used to be. And if you're in a fairly predictable situation and you don't have it, and the other thing too is I don't think it gives your offense the best chance to succeed. Like the greatest offenses we've ever seen, those Florida teams, they made it work, but to me that feels more like the exception than the rule.
Yeah.
And that was also what 16, 17 years ago when all that stuff worked. And I just think that you got to have one voice in the huddle. You got to have a leader. You got to have a guy. Look, he doesn't have to be able to run a lot. Michael Penix doesn't run a lot. Cam Rising runs a little, but doesn't mostly plays from the pocket. So isn't Jaden Delore runs some, but mostly plays from the pocket. So I don't think you have to have a dual threat quarterback, but you can't have one guy who is in there to run. You can have a wildcat package for the red zone or short yardage. I got no problem with that. That stuff is really effective, right? Like Oregon State, Jack Coletto last year. That stuff works. But you can't, over the course of a drive, say, okay, we're going to have this guy in to run the ball on first down. Then we're going to put the other guy in to throw on second and third down, knowing that he is no threat to run and that the other guy is barely a threat to throw. I just think it gets too disconjointed. So I think Troy Taylor will bring a more spread system to Stanford. That's what he did at Sacramento State. And that'll probably look weird to all of us who are longtime Pac-12 fans.
Do you, since we're kind of talking about quarterback, do you feel like there was an evolution at quarterback? How, 20 to 25 years ago, it was the Tom Brady, Peyton Manning type, sit in the pocket, make your reads, hit the guy that's going to be open 20 yards down the field. To, Tebow, to Burrow, to Justin Fields, to CJ Stroud, maybe, to Caleb Williams.
I mean, I don't think there's one archetype necessarily. You see a lot of different sorts of quarterbacks succeeding in college and in the pro. I just feel like the best is a blend of both. The Mahomes, Josh Allen, even kind of Joe Burrow types. Like they can run, but they mostly run to throw. That's why I love Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams can run, but he likes to run to throw. And that's how you get explosive plays and making plays on an improvisational manner and making plays outside the pocket. I think that's what teams are looking for. Finding those guys, not particularly easy, but I think that's kind of where quarterback is at right now.
That makes sense. Does Stanford bring back any positives on the lines of scrimmage?
Yeah, I think they have a couple offensive linemen back, but I just think overall, they struggled to do so much last year. It's just a reset year. Like it's honestly a situation where you just say, you know what? If we win one conference game, that's a success. If we, if they win one Power 5 opponent, beat one Power 5 opponent this year, that'd be a successful year. They start at Hawaii. Hawaii is not good. They should win. I don't know if they will, but they should. They're 9.5 point road favorites. And then they play Sacramento State. They should be able to win there. If they win one more game, if they repeat their record from last year with what is probably a worse roster because of all the losses and the lack of guys that you've brought in, they have some talented kids from past recruiting classes, but you got a new staff in there, a lot of turnover. That can be weird. Winning 3 games would be a great season. That would be going over their preseason win total now, which is 2.5. So I think that's just where the expectation is across the board, and I don't think you can expect anything, amazing from any particular position group.
So it's kind of based on everything they have, it's kind of like working with a whole team of freshmen that don't
Yeah, I
know.
mean, you're actively playing this year
Mhm.
for next season. You are looking to see, what do we have in this guy? What do we have in that guy? Who can be a starter next? Who can be? That is what you are doing. You're just in constant evaluation mode. Of course, as a staff, you want to put together game plans and you want to run plays and you want to know so that when you have a roster that can compete, you're, in a position to be able to do so and you have the experience to do so. But you can't be you can't be beholden to how many games you're going to win this year. You just can't. You have to look for little signs and then try and build on that for next year and then try and build a little more and just keep building until you get back to a place of semi-relevance.
So, besides the big name coming in at head coach, what is there really a difference between, say, year one at Stanford in 2023 and year one at Colorado 2023?
Yeah, because at Colorado, you brought in the number one portal class in the country. Now you're starting from ground zero, but you are still bringing in more talent. There's more talent on Colorado's roster
Mm-hmm.
that could start on other Power 5 teams
Mm-hmm.
than Stanford.
So basically, what you're saying is that Colorado took advantage of the portal, so they're a top portal team, and whereas Stanford, you basically have guys just to fill spots and be able to field a team, more or less.
I mean, if you went back and detailed every guy that was recruited to Stanford and is going to be playing this year, you can
Mhm.
find some high 3 or 4-star recruits, but have they been in? Are they being put in a position to succeed? Not particularly, because they've got a new system, they've got to deal with a coaching change, and they're just not in a place where they're ready to compete. So, just like with coaching evaluations, I think players have to do the same sort of evaluation. Like, how can I get better? Right? Is like, we want to go out, we want to compete, we want to play as hard as we can, win as many games as we can, but also in the back of our mind have an understanding this is not the year where we're expecting to do it. We're just trying to we're trying to build something. And, at some point when you're building a house, it's just a lot of dirt. And that's what Stanford is right now. And you just got to chip away, frame the house, or put a foundation down, frame the house, put the walls in, put the windows, just little bits at a time.
One step at a time.
Exactly.
So let's go ahead and take a look at that one step at a time. And
Like, I just look at the schedule, and they'll have a better roster probably than Hawaii, better than Sacramento State, but I think they're an underdog in each of those 9 games. Some of them they will be a heavy underdog.
I'd be surprised if they're competitive with USC.
Yeah, no way.
Um,
Arizona will score more points than they're capable of.
you think so?
Yeah. Arizona will score a lot of points. Arizona's got a great offense. They've got a productive quarterback, 2 great receivers, a couple solid offensive linemen, and a good running back, and a coach who knows what he's doing. And they're a motivated program trying to make a bowl this year. So, I think
But I
Arizona.
mean, Northwestern was always that way, and Indiana was always that way.
What do you mean?
They're motivated to make a bowl game, and sometimes
Yeah, but I
hang
don't know that
on.
Northwestern and Indiana had the players to do it. Arizona does. Arizona's got the second or third best receiving tandem in the conference. Easily. I think it's probably USC number 1 with Mario Williams and Dorian Singer. Then it's probably Roman Dunze, Jalen McMillan, and then it's T-Mac and Jacob Cowing. Like, they have those. That is an elite pair of weapons, and I like their tight end as well. Like, they got players. They've brought in Power 5 transfers that are going to help them get better on defense. Arizona. If you told me right now Arizona goes 7-5, I'd totally believe you. Absolutely.
So speaking of Arizona, do you feel like Arizona specifically, I know we're not really talking about them, but do you feel like they have kind of fallen off or taken a step back from their 2014 season when they played?
Yeah, well, I mean, they bottomed out. They lost 20 games in a row. Like, they were on an L, like, 8 or something when Jed Fish first took them over. I don't even remember. Like, the losing streak got to be ridiculous, and all he's done is build it up. They were a competitive 1-11, which, yeah, it's a bad team, but they were a competitive 1-11, and they backed up that moniker, or that label, whatever you want to call it, by going 5-7 last year and beating a Pac-12 contender in UCLA on the road. And I think when you look at what they're capable of, yeah, they can make a bowl game because they can score a lot of points. Their problem is they can't stop anybody, which is the problem, frankly, of a lot of Pac-12 teams. But no, I don't think Stanford wins that game. They will not beat Oregon, or well, they shouldn't. They shouldn't beat Oregon. Colorado, you're on the road, so I'm going to lean towards no. UCLA, I don't think Chip Kelly's going to lose that game. Washington, no way. Washington State, Oregon State, you are on the road and you are worse than both of those teams and both of those rosters. Don't see it. And Cal, I'm like semi-bullish on Cal, so no. And then Notre Dame, maybe in a rivalry they pull an upset there.
See, so you're saying what, 2-10 at best?
I think 3-9 at best. I think 3-9 at best. I think 1-11 at worst.
Okay. Where's your 3? So obviously Hawaii and Sac State.
Yeah, and then between Colorado, Cal, and then one of the 3 between Washington State, Oregon State, and Arizona, I could see them pulling an upset. I mean, they beat Notre Dame last year. They were a bad football team last year too, but they beat them. Mm-hmm. So I think those are your most likely upset spots. But I just I'm not going to be picking any of those. Like, as I look at their schedule and get close to doing schedule predictions on Locked On Pac-12, I'm leaning heavily towards 2-10 for Stanford, bordering on 1-11, but probably 2-10.
So because when I look at the schedule, I think 3-9. I pray to God 4-8 for the Notre Dame win.
Yeah, I mean, it's a home game. It's a home game at least.
Yeah.
But at that point they could be really bad.
Yeah. So the one that I'm like trying to really figure out for that third win is UCLA. Because you don't have DTR anymore.
No, but you still have Chip Kelly.
I don't feel like your offensive production is going to be as good.
No, it won't be.
So, I mean, I could definitely see one there.
They've brought in a nice portal class, though. I don't know what they're going to get at quarterback, but I like UCLA's quarterback room a lot better than Stanford's. So if I've got the better quarterback and a more proven coach and a better overall roster, I'm going to take UCLA, even at the Farm.
Okay.
You want to jump over to Washington State?
We sure can. Oh, hold on. Yes. So we talked about year one with Stanford. What do you think are the expectations for year one with Washington State? Now, I know this team is...
No, this is year 2. Yeah, this is year 2 for Jake Dickert. Year 1 was last year.
Okay.
Year half was 2020 or 2021. He took over midseason because there was the whole Rolovich situation, yada, yada, yada. He's the head coach. He's the interim, acting, whatever you want to call it. Then he gets the job. Goes 7-5 last year. Loses both coordinators. Loses a bowl game. But still, winning season in Pullman. I like Jake Dickert. I think Jake Dickert is a good football coach. If you can go above 500, taking over that situation, and by the way, he was over 500 in 2021 as well. So he's put together back-to-back winning seasons in Pullman, coming off of a stretch of kind of chaos with their previous coach, and you've established a clear identity with that team. That game on September 9th, for those watching on YouTube, against Wisconsin, that is the first, great tidbit here, that is the first Power 5 non-conference opponent to play at Martin Stadium since 1998.
Who was it in 98?
I think it was Wake Forest. Let me look that up real quick.
So going into year 2.5, or year 2, if you want to be, I guess, more specific.
Illinois came to town in 1998, not Wake Forest. Yeah, Illinois in 1998.
See, we don't spread misinformation here.
Yeah, obviously.
I've seen a lot of radiating confidence from what little fans I've talked to from the fan base. They feel like 9-3 is probably their ceiling. I mean, they're looking at
that's their ceiling.
They're looking at Oregon State, UCLA, and the Apple Cup as their most likely losses. Now, the only reason I feel
sure about that Oregon State game? I like the Bees. Don't get me wrong, but go ask any Oregon State fan how they feel going up to Pullman this year. Let me know how they feel. Let me know what they say. They do not have fond memories of playing there.
Right.
They like beating Washington State at all last year was getting the monkey off your back for Oregon State. Like it's been their nemesis program for many years. Jonathan Smith, Mike, whoever. Like that's the way it's been. And Washington State is a good team, and they are good at home. I think that's a fascinating game. That is a fascinating way. That is going to set the tone for somebody in a big way to begin Pac-12 conference play. Big way.
The few people I've talked to, they seem more anxious about September 9th over September 23rd.
Well, it's because September 9th is first. I could argue those games are equal in magnitude, but the Wisconsin one is bigger.
Oh, yeah.
But just a little.
Speaking of that game, what was the like feel around the fan base when they did it last year? Because honestly,
wild optimism. How could it like that was one of the biggest wins for Washington State since they beat Oregon on College game day in 2018. First time game day had ever gone up to Pullman. And for them to beat Oregon on game day in the fashion in which they did, in which they were thumping them at halftime, that was a program-altering win. And I think that has borne itself out in that they've been able to succeed post-Mike Leach. And I think that, he orchestrated that program's rise in such a brilliant way. And, RIP the late Mike Leach, of course, tragically, but he did such a great job that it is now, look, it's still one of the tougher jobs in the Pac-12, but they were a doormat forever. Wisconsin was never going to go to Washington State in 2010. They would have seen it as a waste of time. But now they got a home and home with them. And by the way, Wisconsin had Washington State march right into their backyard last year and punch them in the teeth. It was a grinded out game, just the way Jake Dickert likes it, defensive coach. But it was 17-14 in the final. And they beat Wisconsin, and that was a huge. They should have been ranked in the top 25. They started 3-0 last year. They should have been ranked. They absolutely should have been ranked, but they're not. They weren't because they were in Pullman. They also should have beaten Oregon. They are They had a 12-point lead with like 5 minutes to go against the Ducks. If they win that game, they won the following week against Cal. They were that far away from being 5-0 with wins over Wisconsin and Oregon. That is the caliber of program that Jake Dickert has here. And I think Washington State can be a chaos team this year. I'm talking about that tomorrow on the show. It'll come down to Cam Ward, but I look at the teams they play and the teams they don't play, frankly. Like I like them to go over 6.5 wins. That's their preseason win total in Vegas. I think they can win that Wisconsin game. That's perhaps what it'll come down to. I think between Oregon State and UCLA and Arizona, I think you can win 2 of those games. Can, not saying will, but can. I think they'll beat Arizona State. I think Cal's a toss-up. I think Washington's probably a Husky win. I think Stanford and Colorado are both wins. I think Washington State's a better team. So I've got Northern Colorado. That's a win. I've got Colorado State. I think that's a win. I think Arizona State, Cal, and Colorado. I think that's 5 wins right there. And then you get to the tough games, and if you just win a couple of them, I like what Washington State's doing. I would take them over 6.5 wins.
Now, I think their ceiling is 10-2 because I can see 9-3. I would love it to come down to
about 10-2,
November 25th. Because
I don't know if they can get through that whole schedule with only 2 losses. You're saying between Wisconsin, Oregon State, UCLA, Arizona. They have Arizona at home, which helps, and Oregon State. Oregon and Washington. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6 games where, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's 6 games where you are going to be. It's either a toss-up or you're a sizable underdog. And I just, having to go at Oregon and at Washington, that's pretty tough. So you'd have to win one of those. You'd have to win one of those, and I think you'd have to probably beat Wisconsin.
See, so this is my thinking, okay? If Washington can run the table and have 1 loss coming into the Apple Cup, and then Washington State goes in order, win, but it's close, just like Wisconsin most likely will be. Win, close, win, loss, win, and win.
That's asking a lot.
Then
this is a team that is still, I think, questionable along the offensive line. I like their defensive line a lot, led by Ron Stone Jr. I don't like losing Dane Henley to the NFL, but I think having Ron Stone Jr., they have a couple preseason all-conference defensive linemen. I think Dickert's a smart defensive schematic head coach. I think it'll come down to what Cam Ward is able to do. What version of Cam Ward do we get? Do we get the erratic one, or do we get the best version of himself? If he is a better version of what he was a year ago and gets closer to his potential, which is an NFL quarterback, yeah, Washington State can be an 8 or 9 win team. I definitely believe that, but I think 9 is the ceiling. I think he's still – I just don't know if I trust that offensive line enough to where I could say you're only going to lose twice between Wisconsin, Oregon State, UCLA, Arizona, Oregon, Washington. 3 on the road, 3 at home. I don't know if I can see him going 4-2 there and not stumbling against anybody else.
I know it's questionable, and I guess it's just my want that Apple Cup to mean something, like it did kind of under Mike Leach. Like, I understand that Washington State's not good enough yet to go to anything of importance. And who honestly knows if they'll ever get there. Hope that they do.
I mean, they're capable of it. They were an Apple Cup win away from going to the Pac-12 title game in 2018.
True. And I do think, with the 12 team coming soon and USC and UCLA leaving, I do think that, there is a possibility that we see a Washington State team eventually grow to 10-2, 11-1, and get in.
Yeah, it's entirely possible, but you got to have a number of good seasons under your belt before that happens. And I think this can be a good one for Washington State. I think they can be kind of a chaos team. I think they could play spoiler for, a couple semi-dark horses in the Pac-12 title race in Oregon State or UCLA. And I wouldn't be shocked if they were able to pull an upset of Washington or Oregon, but it's definitely tougher because it's on the road.
Absolutely. So
we got to wrap up. I got to bounce here in like 2 minutes.
You're good. So last thing, what do you think would be like the absolute worst case scenario for Washington State?
Honestly, given the schedule, if you don't at least make a bowl game, I think that'd be pretty disappointing. Coming off back-to-back winning seasons, having Cam Ward back on your team, and Jake Dickert having done a lot of the right things up there in Pullman, I feel like if you don't make a bowl game, whatever that looks like, that would be a massive, massive disappointment. I don't think they could be any worse than 4-8. I mean that would be like everything goes wrong. I think those losses would be Wisconsin. You basically lose every game that's going to be somewhat tough, and you have a stumble. So you'd lose to Wisconsin, Oregon State, UCLA, Arizona, Oregon, Washington, and then one of the I can't see him going worse than 5-7. Honestly, that's how I feel about him. And then you would lose to one of Cal, Stanford, Arizona State, and Colorado. I guess maybe you could lose to two. You could lose to Cal and Colorado or ASU. Perhaps ASU's on the road, so is Cal. Maybe, but I mean, I don't see that. I think this is a 5-8 win team.
I do think that Washington State's most likely within that ballpark. So with that being said, I know you have to go, so I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow, probably, depending on when we get on, roughly the same amount of time.
Talk about my California Golden Bears.
Well, I am sorry that you guys, Oregon, didn't land Justin Thomas or whatever.
Justin Williams. Justin Thomas is a golfer.
Justin Williams. I just saw that right before we got on. I was like, oh.
Yeah, five-star linebacker thereafter. It's recruiting. It happens. Win some, you lose some. You're going up against Georgia. They've got a strong pitch to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be back tomorrow. And if you liked all the insight that Spencer gave, you can find him on Twitter at Smalls_55.
That is me.
Which I will have in the banners next time. You can also find him at Locked On Ducks, because that is his team. And it's Indeed. Oregon Ducks, not the Anaheim Ducks from the end.
Yeah, no, not the Anaheim Ducks. Can't forget Locked On Pac-12 as well. That's how I have any semblance of Pac-12 knowledge as I talk about the Conference of Champions every day.
Which is why he joined us today and will join us tomorrow.
Yep.
So I want to thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again. And, just join us tomorrow, and hopefully we have some fun.
Yeah, we'll see you then.
See you later.
Peace.
Peace.